Welcome, everyone, and good afternoon. I am Tony, and I'll be your host and navigator for this webinar. This webinar will be recorded and made available for you for review on our thinkocm.org website after the webinar series later today. This is the first in a series of 6 organizational change management webinars designed exclusively for the biopharma industry. I will give you a quick overview of future webinars at the end of this session. In these webinars, the professional insight offered by our OCM experts in this condensed format isn't available anywhere else. Our panelists will focus on the issues you need to know for success in your organization. Don't hesitate to send us your questions at any time during the webinar by using the Q&A button on your Zoom toolbar. We will respond to as many of them as time permits at the end of the presentation. Today we have seasoned OCM pros to explain what OCM is and why it's an imperative discipline in your projects. So, thanks for joining us, and let me turn this over to Dr. Nancy Cellini, who will tell you more about who we are and today's agenda.
Thanks, Tony, and hi, everybody. A big, warm welcome to you all. I'm so pleased that you made the time to take the time to do this webinar with us today. I want to tell you just a little bit about thinkocm.org, who we are, why we are, and the importance that we feel that we have as a group of professionals in the biopharmaceutical industry. thinkocm.org was organized because of a gap that we started to see in the industry. We often came into projects with big challenges, big global projects, huge investments for this industry. And we often were somewhat perplexed that the people doing the very work had very little, if any, support in terms of reaching the actual people at the other end of the project. And that's really who we are. We work at the intersections of change of people, process, and technology. The regulatory requirements alone in our industry, along with the global implications and the cultural uniquenesses that we have now, not only working globally, but also working virtually, sets us up with this persistent need for rapid transformation. And that's due to the constant evolution of the industry, certainly society this past year, and technology. While there's been so much written on the topic of business transformation, we again often found that people doing the actual detailed and very challenging project work were often left somewhat behind without the tools or the people who really understood how to reach all of the stakeholders on a project. So while we have years and decades of experience in this industry, I think it's also important to call out that we do this work as one of the only independent OCM teams, and I'm going to say that again, one of the only independent OCM teams in our industry. And that is so important because if you've been a business leader or a project leader on a major initiative, you know that you want to hear about risks of potential failure or risks from people not liking the project or not understanding the project. You want to hear those fast, and you want to hear those clearly with integrity and honesty. Our independent expertise is critical so that we can do these honest appraisals when you're faced with a major change effort. Because you know what? People are the change. We often say organizations change, but they don't. People change and bring about the change and implement the changes within our organizations. And as a technologist, educator, public health, and OCM professional, I only work with others who understand these rigorous challenges that we're all faced with these days in this globally, absolutely critical to human health industry that we all find ourselves in. I work with professionals who deeply understand this and have a profound sense of experience. So I am really happy today to be joined by my colleague, Lori Janasco, who understands these real world challenges. So Lori and I will be sharing in this. Lori, can you take a moment, please, and introduce yourself to our audience? Thanks.
Sure. Thank you, Nancy. And hello, everyone, and welcome to the webinar. So as Nancy shared with you, we've been pretty lucky to have the opportunity to work in this field for a pretty long time. And the field itself is constantly evolving, but it is becoming a very critical practice within organizations. And I personally noticed a real shift to OCM about 10 years ago when, by default, my office in the corporate communications department was getting a lot of projects that seemed to need a bit more than general communications support. And at the time, the business didn't know where to turn with these requests. So like so many miscellaneous tasks, they ended up in communications. And since that time, these types of projects have only increased. So as we take you through today's presentation, I think you're going to see how these projects can really run the gamut. And we really look forward to, at the end, when we get to answer all of your questions about OCM, because we're really here today to help you uncover ways that you can incorporate this important practice in your own business. So Nancy's going to take you through our agenda, and then we're going to get started. Nancy?
Okay, thanks, Lori. So here's what we came here to do, and we're going to do it and pack a lot into 30 minutes for efficiency and for refreshing perspective. Whether you're an existing change manager and you're working on existing projects, or you're brand new to OCM, we believe we're going to give you something, each and every one of you, to take away. We'll look at the fundamentals of OCM. We'll look at a common definition. We'll look ahead to some of the 2021 trends. And we'll look at the importance of working what we call agile, but we also call it being fast on our feet. And you'll see some examples of that today as Lori and I work with you in some interactive polling that we're going to do so that we get to know a little bit more about you.
It's not surprising that all of you kind of had a different way of defining project success. But what may surprise you is that good OCM efforts directly correlate to some of the most commonly reported success factors in a project. And the data that you're looking at here is taken from ProSci benchmarking. And if you don't know who ProSci is an organization that's really very dedicated to OCM. So they do a certification process, but they also do a lot of studying about OCM and OCM research. So every year they compile this research from various organizations that they survey. And over the years, they've compiled enough findings to really start to see some trends. So what you're looking at here are just some of the findings that they've published about ROI, or return on investment. So they have found that excellent OCM efforts make a project 6 times more likely to meet objectives. So if your OCM is excellent, you're doing really good work on the OCM side, you're 6 times more likely to meet your goals. So this means business objectives or business goals in general, so that you did what you set out to do. Effective OCM also correlates with meeting project deadlines, so timelines. I think some of you answered timelines in the survey. So the more effectively the people side of change is managed, the more likely you are to finish your project on time. And finally, effective OCM directly correlates with budget. And this one's probably one of the most important, although we don't always talk about it. But almost 80% of projects that are rated excellent in their OCM efforts finish the project on budget. So again, these are just some interesting perspectives about return on investment. But why are we really here today? So Tony, if you go to the next slide. The pharmaceutical industry, like many other regulated businesses, is facing fast and furious change. And we've worked on a number of different types of projects in this space. But what I wanted to do on this slide was just give you an idea of the variety. So when we say, hey, we worked on a lot of different types, you know what those types are and what they mean. So a lot of times we're called in when there's a regulatory change. So sometimes if that happens, ways of working change or a business process will change. And it's not uncommon that a team like ours will get called in to really facilitate that management of that on the people side, on the change side of the business. Also, we've done a lot of new system implementations. I'm sure everyone on this call is familiar with that. I think there's a lot of that going on out there, and we've certainly seen a lot in our business as well. Sometimes if there's a new executive leadership or leadership team, of course, mergers and acquisitions, and then always mindset changes and cultural changes. And sometimes those are tied to new executive leadership, but they don't always have to be. So if you're recognizing any of these in your own organization, you may want to consider a more focused approach to organizational change management. Next slide. So before we move on, we're going to take another poll, and this one's just about why change fails. So if you just take a moment and tell us why you think is the top reason why most change initiatives fail. Oh, wow, we got a nice mix here too, but insufficient management support seems to be really at the top here. We also have a lot in employee resistance, lack of vision, and then of course, inadequate resources, which we've all seen. Next slide, Tony. The truth is that all of these can be reasons why change fails, but the most prevalent are often employee resistance and lack of sponsor engagement. So we've all been there where we don't have our sponsors really involved and engaged, and therefore it doesn't really trickle down through the rest of the organization. So you're probably wondering, how can OCM help address these key issues? Well, Nancy's going to break this down a little bit and explain a little bit about the basics of OCM so that you can see how this all ties in and how it all comes into play. Nancy?
Thanks, Lori. And that was a great poll, and it shows how astute this group is here today. I think they've all had some experience in organizational change management. Actually, one of the very top failure reasons in our industry is still lack of leadership support, lack of that executive sponsor. So when we spend time as OCM professionals with you, and I'm going to get into the definition of what OCM really is and what it is not, a little bit on that. When we spend time finding out and identifying who the sponsors are at the executive level, at the business level, who's on the steering committee, all the people who can really ultimately make change happen throughout the organization, there's a really good reason for that. OCM works within this construct, and this is just one definition. We are all certified by ProSci right now, but as Lori already, I think, made note of, ProSci is one of a number of certifying bodies. I like to give us all a framing definition though. OCM is an application of a structured set of processes and tools that helps lead the side of people change. And notice I didn't say technology change or business process change. Those are all inherently part of organizational change management. But what we really do is work to help you connect with who your stakeholders are. Because failing to find those stakeholders, those movers and shakers, as we sometimes call them in the organization, will mean that you sometimes do have a major risk to the project. And it may be such an impediment that you won't be able to complete the project. So stakeholders have to also not only be identified, but they have to be aligned with the vision. When people don't understand why you're doing something, it sets up what we call resistance. So making sure that all your stakeholders are on board is a really crucial part of this. Now, how do we do that? And how do we do that in a large scale global organization? I would chuckle if I said very carefully, but that would be part of my answer. We go through a very thoughtful process with leadership, with business sponsors, with members of the IT team, to make sure that we've accounted not only for the internal stakeholders, but your external stakeholders as well. It's amazing how many biopharmaceutical industry players now rely on consulting agencies, consulting firms that sit outside of the organization, consultants, and certainly the world of CROs has been really a standard practice in our industry for a long time. We use our stakeholder knowledge and expertise, and our team works a little differently. We don't put you through arduous, never-ending analysis. because we are experienced in this industry and we know the challenges facing this industry right now, we're able to work in an agile mode. We're able to produce the results quickly. We want to make sure that your senior leadership is active and visible. So how do we do that? We arrange meetings. We talk to people. We meet people where they are. We listen, we learn from them, we hear, and we feedback. And all of that goes into a very comprehensive, but I'm not going to say difficult or complex, because sometimes the simplest plans are the most powerful plans. We do this all by aligning together on the priorities and the vision for the project and making sure that the organization is committed to the change. So we use our OCM toolset to help people move through what we call the stages or phases of change. And there was actually a very famous method for helping people work through loss. You may be familiar, if you've studied organizational development and some of the other methods, with the Kubler-Ross method. That was a very profoundly important method that said, hey, when people go through loss, they are going really through change, and there are stages of it. And change isn't just limited to your end users of a system. Leaders who are leading the effort go through their own set of change characteristics and change pains. So we often have to look at the overall change muscle of the organization. How much does everybody really want this change to happen? And we design the engagement opportunities to bring people along who may not want it to change, because I'll let you in on another secret. We humans really don't like change. We really don't. We say we do, but we like the way we do things. And sometimes we fall into patterning, which is why the events of 2020 were so terribly disruptive at the beginning. But you can see the resilience of the human spirit. And this is what we go to in OCM. This is a very human job. And it requires, as I said, reaching in, reaching out, talking to people, and getting people to understand where is it that we're going with this project, that vision. So if we go to the next slide, and we do this in a way that we don't say all changes are equal. There is no one size fits all. And this is why an experienced team in our industry is so important to your initiative. If you've wondered why an OCM effort in the past maybe didn't go so well, I'd ask you to look at the expertise of the people who are trying to bring about the OCM aspect of the project. We understand these domains, and we say there's 5 of them. There might be 7, there might be 8, but we look at every single one of the change initiatives across these 5 horizons. And sometimes some projects have all 5 of them. So the more complex, the more detailed a project is, the more we really have to apply our professional experience along with yours to characterize the effort and then to match it suitably with what's appropriate for this level of change. We'll cover some other changes in terms of future changes in a future webinar, as Tony mentioned at the beginning. But for now, walking away from this webinar today, understanding that characterizing, defining the change is really critical. And not every OCM team knows how to do this. We think it's one of the basic foundational tools of doing good OCM. And now I'm going to turn it back to Lori to talk about some other challenges.
Thanks, Nancy. So with all the focus on these OCM skill sets and all this analysis, you're probably wondering, why is change so difficult? Well, as my colleague said, the most obvious answer is that it's just human nature. But in general, we find that when organizations really struggle with change and organizational change management, there's usually a few things going on. And sometimes it's a lack of a unified platform for how it's done. So this means that HR may do it different from IT, may do it different from accounting. So your stakeholders never really know what to expect or what's going on. And that kind of creates a lot more anxiety because there's no platform for making a large change in the organization. Sometimes they're just not committed, and we say we're honest. We have to be honest. There are organizations out there, and some of you may have worked for them or worked with them in the past, but they're just not committed to OCM, communications, engagement, and sometimes even their own employees. So they just don't really want to hear about that side of it. More often than not, organizations just don't know what to do. So they may have heard about OCM, they may hear the buzzwords, they may know that it's important and that others are talking about it. But when it comes time to apply it to their own organizations or their own problems, they don't really know exactly what to do step by step. Other times there's poor vision, and poor vision means that you can't see the future state. So you may know that you have to implement a technology and you just want to get that done, but you haven't really spent any time building out what that future state is going to look like. And more importantly, communicating it to the people who are going to be impacted by the change. And finally, as we have said a few times, limited or no sponsorship. And you're probably getting the picture that this one is really important. So when you have lack of champions in the C-suite, it can be really, really hard to affect a long-term change in your organization. So next slide, please. We're curious to know, what's the most burning change in your organizations in 2021? And we know you may have several of them, but we're asking just to pick maybe the one that comes to mind first. Okay, do we have the results for that one? Oh, wow, there's a nice mix here, but there's a lot of technology shifts going on. I can't say that that one surprises me. We are seeing that one quite a bit. But we also have some management reorganization, even some mergers and acquisitions. And it looks like there's quite a few culture changes as well. Some of you selected other. I'd be curious if those are culture mindset changes, maybe mindset in a certain area of the organization. Very, very interesting mix. Nevertheless, there's lots of new things going on. And even though that sometimes that looks overwhelming, that's very, very good news, because organizations that are on the move and have changes going on, they're organizations that are alive and they are moving towards the future. So talking about the future, if we can go to the next slide. While we don't have a crystal ball, we wanted to share with you some of the things, some trends actually, that we've been seeing among our clients and among our peer OCM networks. And you may or may not be surprised by some of these. The first one is increased technology implementation. So we're seeing a lot more of this again. Organizations are really doing it faster than ever. And you may have heard of the term digital transformation. I can share with you that most of our existing clients do have a digital transformation program that's part of their corporate objectives. The other is focus on operational excellence or creating efficiencies. So many businesses are starting to look closely at their business processes. They're changing the way things are getting done. And sometimes this is moving from transactional to a more strategic organization, which is a very big change. And technology often plays a role in this. Changes in ways of working refers to the long-term changes that are going to take place as a result of COVID-19. So some folks are not going to go back to the office, at least not in the same frequency as they have in the past. And these are more permanent changes that require more of a cultural shift in the way that the company does business. And the last one may surprise you. I called it the human impact of AI, so planning for what's to come. And I put this on here because I'm recently hearing a lot more about businesses starting to focus on thinking about plans for introducing AI into their organizations. And they're thinking about this more and more because naturally employees have a negative connotation with AI. And the real implementation of AI is sometime in the future. So this is not, even though we hear a lot about it, this is not happening tomorrow. You're not going to walk into an accounting office and encounter a bot behind the desk tomorrow. But there is an ongoing trend to start to get leadership to think about how they are going to slowly start introducing this to create a more positive association with it, so that when it does come full force, that people are ready for it and that they have a good outlook about it. Next slide, thanks, please. So the one thing we do know for sure is that change is not going away, and the need for business continuity is only going to increase in times of crisis. And organizations that embrace organizational change management are going to be better prepared for the challenges of the future. Next slide, please. So what are some of the things that you can do to create a change-ready organization? So when we look at organizations that really are good at agile change management, they have a couple of things in common. Many of them have leaders who really understand the benefits and are committed to investing in OCM. So that effort really does start from the top. Others, they really work towards setting up an OCM center of excellence. So they lay that foundation early. They want a place where everyone in the organization can go to learn how to do change management properly. So they're all doing it the same way. So they have the same platform. They often commit to one methodology that works for their organization. So as Nancy mentioned before, there are a lot of methodologies out there. And if you're interested in applying this in your organization, you really should look over those methodologies and choose one that really works for you and your company. And you'll see that the methodologies, they start to sound very similar. There's a similar thread going through all of them. It's just a matter of the appetite that you have for the level of analysis, the toolkits, things like that. And finally, many organizations are working with OCM experts just to get that effort off the ground. And with that, I'm going to pass this back to Nancy, because she's going to talk to you a little bit more about our unique way of working with our clients and how we help them do just that. Nancy?
Thank you, Lori. And you really set the table, so to speak. Tony, if you can go to the next slide here for kind of just a summation of all the good things that have been mentioned so far today. And we've worked as professionals at the intersections, as I said, not only of big technology and big business process, but we've also worked to help biopharmaceutical organizations recalibrate their project methodology. And as Lori just mentioned, even their OCM capability internally. One of the other things we've had lots of experience doing is setting up what we call internal change advocacy networks. So we really follow the martial art way of thinking, which is each one, teach one. So you don't have to go to OCM school to be a change manager. By virtue of you all being here, you are already all change advocates. So how can you get started on your journey or get restarted on your journey? We have a couple ideas for you in closing out this portion of the webinar today. You can go to our thinkocm.org website, and we really encourage you to take our top line survey. It's short, it's quick, and it's meant to give you some feedback on your project with no obligation whatsoever. You get the results, they're yours to keep alone and work from, or we also invite you, we're going to give you some other takeaways today, some goodies. We invite you to have a 1 hour, also no obligation, free brainstorming session with Lori and I or other members of our team to go through your results and talk to you about risk. And what are risks to the project? Well, I like to give you the top three. Number one, your executive sponsor just came in. They don't know who you are and they're not returning your phone calls. Number two, I laugh about that, but we've actually seen that happen. You have a business leader in Europe who's absolutely frantically angry with you because no one has talked to them about the change they just heard is going to be implemented in 3 weeks in a system. Also happened. And number three, you have a senior level clinical trial manager who's gone to your boss complaining about the new technology being onerous, and they like things just the way they are, and they want to go back to the previous state. Not good signs, all risks. And there's reasons for why those things happen. We want to help you identify risk early and often and overcome it. So that's the purpose of the survey. And again, we invite you all to partake in that. And then we really do look forward to having some time to talk with you all. So in closing this part of the seminar, this part of our webinar, I just have a few other closing thoughts for you, because we started out with, why you need this. Why do you need this in the industry so desperately? And we told you what OCM is. OCM is not a placebo effect. It's not a magic wand. It's downright hard work, and it needs to be done, because this industry that we're all in, if you weren't paying attention in 2020 and realized how vital this industry is to human health around the world, then it's time to pay closer attention to what this industry does. What this industry was able to do in unbelievable record time is amazing. And this industry is more important to us all now than perhaps ever before. And if we all learned one really vital lesson from 2020, it's that change can often be highly unpredictable. It can come in waves, and it can come when we least expect it. But again, this industry is why I wake up inspired every day to work with people like all of you who are change makers. So I want to thank you on behalf of Lori, Tony, and I. We do have some time for the Q&A questions that came in. I'm going to turn this back to Tony in our last 10 minutes or so. And Tony, can we try to get through as many of the questions that came in as possible?
This is a challenging group. It's very interesting. We've got two in particular that are very intriguing. And in one case here, we have someone who said, in my company, the communications department seems to handle most of the change work. How is an OCM group any different? And Lori, right up your alley.
Sure, and thank you for that question. We get that a lot. So OCM generally looks at 6 different levers in a project, communication being only one of them. So we really look closely at things like sponsorship, and then we will work and coach with sponsors to make sure that they understand what's happening in the project and their role in the project, because we see that sometimes that's one of the most important things, is having that sponsor involved. And sometimes either the sponsor may not have run a large project like this or been a sponsor in the past, and they really don't know what to do. So we kind of gently coach them, and we create a plan for them, so it's very, very clear the steps that they need to take. So we work that lever pretty closely. Other things we do are employee engagement. That's also very different than communications. Although a communications department may do some engagement work, we do it specifically for the project that we're working on. So we look at specific groups of stakeholders and decide if there's activities above and beyond general communications that they need to participate in to move them up that change curve. We also get involved when there's resistance, so in resistance management planning, and those are really custom solutions. So depending on what's happening with the resistance, it could be one person, maybe it's a group of people, maybe it's someone at a very high level in the organization. We would determine a strategy with the project team and work through that resistance so that we could kind of get that person moving along as well. Excuse me, other things we do are education and coaching. And this is a little bit different than training in the sense that it may be creating additional materials that are needed to educate our stakeholders, or just educating stakeholders in the organization who are part of the Change Advocate Network. So oftentimes we will pull together these networks of people on the ground to help us out with the OCM, but we need to lead them along. So it's our responsibility to really kind of share with them what they need to do. We work with them and kind of coach them in their advocate responsibility. And then of course we do communications. So those communications are very, very specific to the project that we're working on. And oftentimes they can be very technical. And because we are so involved and ingrained with that project, we are able to easily write those communications and manage them I think in some cases a little bit better than a general communications department.
Thank you, Lori. There's an interesting question here, Nancy. I think this one's for you, and it's, to me, it seems to have a connotation towards independence and the power of being an independent OCM function. And that is, what if the change is about how projects are run?
Oh, that's a great one. Well, I kind of touched on that before. We have actually helped restructure the very way that projects are governed, the very way that project methodology intersects in terms of some of the other disciplines within organizations. You know, the more complex a project is today, the more reliant our clients are on having really strong methodology, not just for OCM, but in how they do training and how they do business process engineering. So we've actually had real skin in that game of looking at how the projects themselves are being done. And wow, that's a big change, because you take an organization who's been, you know, rolling out systems and technology for maybe several decades, and coming in to undo and reintroduce new methods can be really frightening. It can be a really daunting change for the organization. So we've actually worked through them. We've lost no one through those processes. I'm very happy to report that once people again, and this is what people need to see, for all of you on the call with us, they need to see the benefit. They need to see that this isn't just a change that someone, you know, up above has decided they're going to do, but that there's a real reason for making the change. And when you can demonstrate better metrics in projects, better return on investment in projects, faster turnaround time, better user satisfaction for the client-facing part of it, you've really accomplished something major. So we've actually had a lot of experience in that area. Thanks, Tony.
Thank you, Nancy. I'd like to thank all the participants in today's webinar for joining us. We do have some additional information that we'd like to offer you. That has to do with our website. Please visit the website. And remember, it's think-ocm.org. We'll get additional information there for you in terms of future webinars. Those webinars will cover the following topics: future trends, OCM and the biopharma industry. We are tentatively scheduling that for Tuesday, March 9th, 2021. Some other topics that we intend to cover: if change is so good, why is it so darn hard? We'll discuss resistance management, change fatigue and overload, clarity and purpose, mission, and goals. Independence Days: why OCM must be free from competing motivations and other vendors on your project. We had a great question on that topic today. OCM Unplugged: the essential steps to invoking your inner change guru and building your change advocacy network and coalition. And last but not least, some clarifications. A communication plan is not an OCM strategy alone. We really hope you found this webinar informative and suited to your needs. Thank you very much, and have a great day.